Welcome to the program. My name is Vince Nigro. On Insights today, James Stewart. His new book, Being Prime Minister. We just interviewed him. Great interview. Gives you great insight on why he wrote it, what you can get out of it. James Stewart on the program. James Stewart, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
Being Prime Minister, a book you wrote. I know you have a follow-up book coming up, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the program. You were a history teacher, educational background. You've seen a lot of students. You obviously dedicated this book to your past students, your present students, and your future students. When I read that right away at the beginning, I said, no, maybe this book is one of these history books that I'm going to kind of get bored. But I have to be honest with you, I read the book from cover to cover. It was an easy read, and it kept me going. The way you had set up the book was interesting for me, and I got a lot out of it. When you decided to write this book, what was the genesis behind it? Was it something you saw it as an educational tool? As something you said to yourself, a lot of people that I've taught in the past, whatever, kind of don't get a sense of what's going on with the prime minister. Let me give a little bit of an inside track what's happening with prime ministers. They're just human beings like everybody else.
Right.
They wake up in the morning. I'm sure they go to the washroom. They do what they got to do. And is that what you were trying to portray behind the scenes?
It was. And I'll go to your original thing. Yeah. I really appreciate you acknowledging who the book was dedicated to, my students, past, present, and future, because I really wrote it for students. It was inspired by my teaching career. And so, when you're a history teacher, you often have to bring interesting anecdotes and elements to try to keep students' attention. So I've been collecting a lot of anecdotes about prime ministers, whether it was Mackenzie King and his dogs, or R.B. Bennett writing personal letters to people during the Great Depression and putting his own money in the envelopes. I've been collecting all these anecdotes. And I'd always wanted to write a book. I've been a writer since I was very young. And at the same time, I've also always had a deep interest in Canadian prime ministers. So if you put all of that together, you've got a pretty good reason for writing a book. I didn't intend it to be a teaching tool per se, but it certainly is something that I think a student who's keen on Canadian history would enjoy reading about it, because, as you say, it is kind of a human kind of reading as opposed to a dense history book. But also would be really useful for Canadian history teachers who may not know some of these anecdotes about Canadian prime ministers. They want to liven up their lesson. There's plenty of anecdotes in there about everything from celebrities to pets to the security of the prime ministers.
And as I said to you, one of the things I learned, I didn't know that Pearson had won the Nobel Peace Prize before he became prime minister.
Right.
And there's a lot of good points that you make within the book that I've picked up on, and I think it's a great tool where a lot of the stuff that you've put in your book, I mean, you don't hear, you haven't picked up on in a lot of other publications and going on. When you were writing the book and you were putting together how you went about it, material, libraries, you obviously interviewed 6 living prime ministers.
Yes.
And each of them, I'm sure, had a different kind of take to being a prime minister. Yeah. While you were doing those interviews, did you get a true sense from these prime ministers that they were being, A, frank with you, and B, tell us which one was your kind of favorite experience with these prime ministers?
It's kind of like saying, pick your favorite child, because I like all the prime ministers and have a deep good answer for political answer for them and the office.
Yeah.
But you certainly know when you're interviewing a prime minister that they definitely have their legacy at top of mind, and they are always on, I would say, a track of, they know that this is going to end up in a history book somewhere, and they have a message that they want to get out. The other interesting thing is, I interviewed 6 of the then 7 living former prime ministers. Since that time, Brian Mulroney has passed away. John Turner has passed away. 2 great interviews, by the way. But the interesting thing was, if you think about Mulroney and Jean Chrétien, they served for 10 years each. And then if you interviewed someone like Joe Clark or Kim Campbell, who served less than a year, there is a difference in, there's a bit of an aura about prime ministers who served for a longer period of time. I would say there's almost even a little bit more of a distance between them and me when I'm interviewing them. Just that power that they have creates a distance. And those prime ministers who served for a lesser amount of time seem to be just a little bit more intimate and personal with you. For example, when I interviewed Joe Clark, I got on the phone with him, and the first thing he says was, what area code are you dialing from? I don't recognize this one. So just a normal kind of question. And when I interviewed Paul Martin, again, he gets on the phone. He had been delayed a little bit. And the first thing he says to me is, geez, I'm sorry for being late, but I've just been going like hell today. And it's just, an ordinary guy talking to someone else. So that's sort of the things that I noticed in the interviews.
When you were interviewing them, and in your book, you try to show a very human side to prime ministers.
Yes.
They like pets, sports, fishing, movie stars. Right? I want to get to the Bob Hope, Barbara Streisand piece.
Yeah.
When you were interviewing them, were you trying to extrapolate the human side of how they did their job, or did that just come out naturally in the interview?
Yeah, I was trying to get more anecdotes to color the book. For example, there's a famous scene when Brian Mulroney, near the end of his time in office, he went on a hunting trip with Boris Yeltsin. And he was photographed having killed a boar. And I wanted to know from Mr. Mulroney where the boar skin was, because apparently in his memoirs, he says, somewhere in the Library and Archives Canada is a boar skin. And I wanted to ask him about that, where it had been. And he said, it's in there for sure. And he told me a little bit more about how the whole hunting situation came to be. So I was just more looking for a little bit more color. I'll give you another example. Jean Chrétien is famous. Well, I guess he's not famous, but he likes to play the little guy from Shawinigan shtick. But in fact, he's very much a lover of architecture, classical music, and art. And so I said to him, Mr. Chrétien, I know you love classical music. So who's one of your favorite composers? And he kind of just swatted away the question and really didn't want to answer it because it wasn't part of that shtick that he has about being the little guy from Shawinigan. So I said, I just put Brahms in the book anyway, just for fun. And so the other interesting thing that he told me was, I had read that he signs a lot of documents on a Sunday. And when he does so, he listens to classical music and watches NFL football with the sound.
I have read that.
That's right. Yeah. And so I said, tell me about this. And he says, well, 1/3 of the players, they're all named Smith anyway, so I don't need the sound. So, that's an anecdote worth gold. So I was just looking to get a little bit more insight into them, the job, and some of the anecdotes they might be able to share.
Yeah, and even in the book, you talk about certain prime ministers. 2 of them passed away in office. I believe it was Thompson who had the heart attack while he was having lunch or dinner with the Queen.
That's right.
And as you have all these anecdotes and whatever, as I said, the book really brought out for me, aside from the anecdotes and the kind of cool stuff that made these prime ministers human, is that there's quite a bit of information that, from the standpoint of our foundation here in Canada, is so important to know.
Yeah, I think we have recently been underselling the importance of Canadian prime ministers in our history. And I don't think that's wise in terms of how we're teaching young people history. And I know that we have to, there's a lot of history to teach in Canada, but the decisions that are made at the top, at the leadership level, are extremely important. So I think it's important that we continue to try to understand the people who held those positions. And this is the human side of things.
I agree with that because, even with Mark Carney becoming, as we're airing this program, kind of walked into the prime minister's position,
Right.
I still, in terms of talking to different people from all backgrounds, whatever, it's amazing how people ask me the question, how did this person become the prime minister so fast?
Yeah.
And I said, you don't understand that? And they said, no, I understand that in the United States, the prime minister gets elected directly, but how did this guy get in? So obviously, you have to be the leader of the party, the party of the day. The leader of that party becomes the prime minister, and he has or she has all those rights in terms of appointing the judges in the Senate and things like that. But it's still amazing how still a lot of Canadians don't understand how a Mark Carney kind of walked into becoming the prime minister, or how that person is selected.
Right. And this gets at civics, which is a very important course, which I've also taught in my teaching career. And, there's a renewed conversation about the importance of civics happening right now for the very reason that you explain. And it was the same thing when the king wouldn't say certain things, and people are, well, why isn't he saying things? And they don't understand that the king only acts on the advice of his advisors, which is the prime ministers. And so in Ontario, we do have a half credit course in grade 10 for civics. A lot of people think maybe it should be a full credit.
Yeah, it should.
But in other provinces of the country, civics is folded into a nebulous course called social studies, and they don't get the same kind of rigor, I would say, as we have here in Ontario. But this just really illustrates the importance of a good education in civics and, quite frankly, history too.
Yeah, obviously, having a good knowledge of your past before you can continue to work on your future is kind of nice to have that as a base.
I used to talk to my students about history, and this would be in the early going of a Canadian history class. And I'd say, if you ever, do you want to understand your parents a bit better? Or if you're going out on a date with someone, do you want to understand them a bit better? They said, yeah. I go, well, what do you do? Well, you ask questions about their past. When did you do this? What was it like? Where did you grow up? Where have you been and traveled? So history of a country is like the history of a person. You have to dig in there. And if you want to understand Canada better, or if I want to understand you better, Vince, we're going to have a conversation and dig into each other's past.
And James, I think the book is like, obviously this book is something you've written, and you got the other one coming up. We'll talk about that. Is that, and I'm not trying to relate it to the Trump tariffs, whatever, but the Trump tariff issues that are happening right now, I do believe that it's brought Canadians closer together. And I think sometimes it needs something like that for us Canadians to appreciate our own foundation, our own constitution, our own, what we've built here, and be proud of it. And I felt in the past that we were Canadians, but we really didn't really support that or be proud of it. Not that we weren't proud of it, just for some reason, we may have taken it for granted a little bit. But I think this tariff Trump stuff has kind of brought us together. And I think reading your book, to be honest with you, it made me say to myself, wow, we got a great country. And that's the beauty about your book, anecdotally wise, educational wise. It kind of gave me a little more wind in my sails in terms of being a Canadian. Not that I wasn't. It just said to myself, wow, it just validated being a Canadian.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Vince. It's great to hear it. And, I'll pick up on what you were saying, because when we live in Canada, which is one of the greatest countries in the world, and we do take those things for granted. It's kind of like when everything's going great in your life, and then you get a health problem. You're like, oh my God, I shouldn't take for granted my health. Yeah. And in Canada, at certain times we've had great patriotism. If we go back to the centennial era of 1967, there's a great feeling of pride then. In 1995, we really felt, what are we going to do about Canada with this Quebec separation issue? And remember, there's the big Canada rally in Montreal in October of 1995. Other moments, during sports, well, just when we beat the United States in the Four Nations Cup, but winning gold medals in various sports, we feel the patriotism then. But we really, because Canada's had a pretty cherished and charmed life, we kind of forget how special the country is, and how hard the country has actually worked to make it thrive. And, you can't take Canada for granted. It's not the easiest country to govern either. You know, we have various ethnicities, we have different languages, we have indigenous history, we have great regions that we have to be concerned about that all feel a little bit differently about how the world works. So, you know, Roy McGregor, the columnist of the Globe and Mail for a long time, he once described Canada as a bumblebee nation because you look at a bumblebee and you figure, how does that thing fly? And you look at Canada and you figure, how does that all those different parts come together and work together as a great country?
Right. On this book here, Being Prime Ministers, as you said, I mean, I'm not asking you to pick your favorite story, whatever. What are some of the highlights for you in this particular book that come to mind in writing this book?
As I've reflected on it over the years, I think one of my favorite chapters is the security chapter, because a lot of Canadians also don't realize how much security is around the prime ministers. And as I was researching that chapter, I did speak with some VIP security officers who, you know, were telling me, well, that's the way it should be. If you're doing a good job of security, you don't know the prime minister has security. But there have been very interesting security breaches, and it's interesting how it's changed over time. It used to be quite benign. Like, people would show up at the prime minister's residence, and the people at the door were told to say, no, he's not available right now. Call his office tomorrow. You know, you can't get anywhere near a prime minister's office now. And then the celebrities chapter, I've always found quite interesting. And you mentioned earlier, Bob Hope and Barbara Streisand. Canadian prime ministers have interacted with quite a few celebrities over the years, and I think Mackenzie King and Shirley Temple is an interesting one too. So those are a few of my favorite anecdotes among many. You know, there's a lot to talk about with the prime ministers.
Well, it's a great read. As I said, it was an easy read, and I got quite a bit out of it. You also have a follow-up book coming out. Tell us a little bit about your follow-up book.
Yeah. So this fall, my second book is coming out with Sutherland House, and the title is The Prime Ministers. And so there hasn't been a survey of all Canadian prime ministers written for 25 years. The last one came out in 1999 by Jack Granatstein and Norm Hilmer. So this is going to be a new and updated look at Canadian prime ministers. Probably a nice companion to this book. This one is sort of the fun, easygoing anecdotal read. This one will be a bit more, if you want to learn your history, pick up this book. Be a great resource for a student actually who has to do a project on a prime minister. Hopefully they're still assigning projects on prime ministers here and there. So it's going to be a nice companion to this book, and I'm looking forward to presenting that to the Canadian people so we can understand our history a little bit better.
Well, hopefully when that comes out, we'll get you to come back and we'll talk a little bit about that book. But in the meantime, it was a great read. And I'm sincerely telling you that not because you're here, but it was an easy read. And I would recommend, if you haven't got a chance, pick up the book. You'll enjoy the book and you'll learn a lot of it. So James, thank you for being on the program, and all the best with the upcoming book.
Thank you, Vince. Great to be here.